This is also a time of change for my family.
The briefing had barely begun when Catherine noticed the one face that did not belong. Around the Balmoral table, senior figures were settling into what should have been a tightly controlled royal discussion, but her attention remained fixed on an unfamiliar aide standing near the rear of the room. Then she quietly turned toward Charles. Seconds later, the king lifted his hand, stopped the briefing completely, and demanded to know who had authorized the stranger's presence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine did not look away. The stranger had avoided her eyes twice, and that reaction sharpened the unease she could not dismiss. William leaned toward her and asked what she had seen. Balmoral, the royal family's private Scottish residence used for secluded gatherings away from London, was meant to protect meetings like this from outside pressure. That was why the stranger mattered. He was close enough to hear a restricted discussion involving Charles, Catherine, William, Camilla, and only approved advisors. Charles felt the interruption immediately. Irritation touched his voice as he asked why the briefing had stopped, but it vanished when Catherine explained that the man was not someone she recognized from the authorized group. The king closed the folder before him. A restricted briefing meant a meeting limited to specifically approved people because sensitive matters could be discussed there. He looked toward the aide, then security, and said nothing would continue until the man's clearance was confirmed. The security officer checked the attendance list twice before telling Charles that the stranger's name appeared nowhere. William stiffened beside Catherine, while she felt suspicion harden into something more serious. Royal protocol, the formal system of rules governing access and conduct around the monarchy, had not merely been bent. Someone had entered a controlled room without documented permission. Camilla remained unusually still when the aide spoke. He insisted that a senior household office had instructed him to attend, but when Charles asked for authorization, he could produce nothing. The queen consort glanced toward the table rather than the man, and Catherine noticed it. William noticed her reaction too. No accusation was made, yet the silence around Camilla suddenly carried more weight than the stranger's explanation. Charles ordered the aide escorted outside. As the door closed, Catherine expected him to watch the departing man. Instead, the monarch turned toward Camilla. That single look changed everything that evening. What looked like a simple security failure was about to become painfully personal, because everyone inside Balmoral had something different to lose if the stranger explained why he was really there. The door had closed, but the tension remained inside the room. Charles was angry. Catherine was unsettled. William had become fiercely protective, and Camilla suddenly seemed more interested in the silence than the interrupted briefing. The unknown aide had been removed, yet his presence had exposed something more dangerous than poor security. It revealed how little trust existed between people who were supposed to be sitting on the same side of the royal table. Charles knew exactly what had been placed at risk. The meeting concerned sensitive plans for future royal responsibilities, including who would carry greater duties as the monarchy changed in the years ahead. Those plans mattered because they touched authority, public appearances, and the private structure surrounding the sovereign. If an unauthorized person could hear even part of that discussion, the problem was no longer simple embarrassment. It challenged the king's control over his own household. William turned quietly toward Catherine and lowered his voice. He asked whether she had ever seen the aide before. Her answer came slowly. She had. Not inside a restricted meeting, not beside Charles, and never in a position where he could hear confidential discussions. But weeks earlier, she had noticed the same man standing in a palace corridor. The prince's expression hardened immediately. Catherine had remembered a face everyone else had ignored. Camilla felt the pressure shift toward her. When Charles asked whether she knew the man, the queen consort paused before answering. She said she recognized him as someone connected loosely with household work, but insisted she had never invited him into the room. The delay was small, yet it landed heavily. Charles watched her carefully. She resented what that silence seemed to suggest, and made clear that her staff should not be treated as guilty simply because one stranger had crossed a boundary. Catherine suddenly remembered more. After a Windsor event, she had seen the aide outside a private household office, speaking quietly with one of Camilla's senior staff members. Windsor Castle is one of the monarchy's principal royal residences, used for both official duties and private family occasions. The memory mattered because the meeting had not looked accidental. The two men had been speaking with the ease of people who expected to see each other again. Charles immediately requested the Balmoral access record. The document showed who had been approved to enter controlled areas and under whose authority. One entry stood out. The aide had not received individual clearance at all. He had entered through a staff route using another person's authorization. William understood the danger before anyone said it aloud. This might not have been a stranger taking the wrong doorway. Someone already trusted inside Balmoral may have deliberately moved him closer to the king's private discussion. And when Catherine finally remembered the earlier encounter that had first made her suspicious, the mystery reached back to a single Windsor evening everyone had tried to forget. Weeks before Balmoral, Catherine had already witnessed the moment that would later make everything fall into place. It happened after a formal Windsor gathering, when most guests had departed, and the family believed the evening was finished. Crossing a quieter corridor, she saw the same aide speaking with a senior member of Camilla's household. Nothing dramatic happened. No voices were raised. Yet one sentence Catherine overheard was strange enough that she remembered the man's face long after the night ended. Catherine had been leaving the private family reception with William when she slowed near the corridor. The evening itself had appeared ordinary, but the exchange ahead of them felt strangely deliberate. Royal household offices manage schedules, correspondence, staffing, and access for individual members of the family, which means one office quietly reaching into another royal's confidential planning can raise serious questions about boundaries. The princess said nothing at first. She simply listened. The aide leaned closer to the senior staff member and asked, "Will I be inside when the Balmoral responsibilities are discussed?" The answer came without hesitation. "You will be where you need to be." Catherine felt the words settle heavily, because the Balmoral meeting had not yet been formally announced to the wider staff. Somehow, this man was already speaking as though his place inside it had been arranged. William noticed her concern before they reached the end of the corridor. Catherine told him exactly what she had heard, and asked why someone outside the expected circle seemed to know about the discussion so early. The prince urged caution. There could be an innocent explanation, he said, and neither of them had enough information to accuse anyone. She accepted his reasoning, but the unease never disappeared. That man's face remained fixed in her memory. William now regretted those words. Standing inside Balmoral weeks later, he understood that Catherine had noticed the warning before anyone else. His frustration turned inward, because the same stranger she had questioned was the man who had just been removed from Charles's private briefing. He told her quietly that he should have taken the Windsor exchange more seriously. She did not blame him. What mattered now was discovering who had turned that conversation into access. Charles found the answer partly buried inside a fictional documented security account. The record showed that the aide's name had been proposed for Balmoral clearance 2 days earlier and rejected. Yet another staff authorization had later allowed him through. The king read the entry twice, then stopped asking for explanations on paper. Charles summoned the senior staffer from the Windsor conversation immediately and ordered Catherine and William to remain nearby. The mystery had finally acquired a name, a decision, and a trail, and the monarch was about to confront the person who could explain all three. Charles did not raise his voice when the staffer entered. That made the confrontation worse. Catherine remained seated beside William while Camilla watched from across the room. every person understanding that one answer could change the balance inside the household. The king pushed the attendance sheet forward, placed one finger beside the missing name, and asked the simplest question of the entire afternoon. Who had told the uninvited aide that he could enter? Charles chose to handle the questioning himself. He could have passed the matter immediately to administrative officials, but the breach had happened inside his own restricted meeting, and he wanted the answer directly. Catherine remained because she had first challenged the stranger's presence, while William stayed because he had witnessed both her concern and the interruption. Camilla refused to leave as well. One of her household employees now stood at the center of the problem, and she would not allow decisions about that office to be made without her. The senior staffer shifted uneasily before claiming there had been confusion over access. Charles listened without interrupting, then slowly set his pen down. A rejected authorization followed by a successful entry, he said, was not confusion, it was a decision. The king wanted to know who made it. The staffer hesitated, and that delay immediately changed the mood. William watched him closely. Catherine already knew this was no ordinary mistake. Camilla stepped in before the silence could deepen. She argued that the room was turning one staffing error into a judgment about her entire household. The queen consort's frustration was unmistakable. Catherine did not answer emotionally. Instead, she calmly repeated the Windsor exchange exactly as she remembered it, explaining how the aide had asked whether he would be inside when the Balmoral responsibilities were discussed. That memory forced the staffer to stop pretending the situation had begun that afternoon. The senior employee finally admitted what had happened. In a fictional recorded account made during the questioning, he said he had allowed the aide inside so the man could observe the discussion and prepare for future coordination involving Camilla's office. Household coordination simply meant different royal teams sharing schedules and responsibilities, so duties did not clash. But observation was very different from authorization, and Charles knew it. Charles leaned forward and asked one final question. Had he personally approved the aide's presence? No. The answer came quickly. Then the king asked whether Camilla had known the man would be inside. This time the staffer's silence stretched too long. Camilla broke it herself. She told Charles she knew the aide might be nearby, but she had never authorized him to enter the briefing. That distinction should have eased the pressure. Instead, it forced the monarch to decide whether the deeper failure belonged to one employee or to a household culture that had stopped respecting his boundaries. For Charles, the question was no longer whether one aide had crossed a doorway. The question was how that doorway had become crossable at all. He had spent years surrounded by layers of protocol designed to prevent exactly this kind of confusion. Yet an unauthorized person had entered a sensitive family briefing through the permission of someone already trusted. Now the king faced an uncomfortable truth. Power means little when the people enforcing it begin making exceptions. Charles moved quickly, because hesitation would only weaken the boundary further. The king's private office, the small team responsible for coordinating his immediate work, communications, and confidential arrangements, normally worked alongside separate royal households without crossing their internal lines. Those divisions mattered because sensitive meetings depended on knowing exactly who had authority to approve access. The monarch temporarily narrowed that authority to a smaller group and ordered every restricted briefing entry reviewed until the failure was fully understood. Camilla took the decision personally. In a private conversation with Charles, she argued that loyal members of her household were now being treated as suspects because of one employee's judgment. The queen consort said, years of service seemed to count for nothing once doubt entered the room. He did not soften his answer. Loyalty mattered, but loyalty could never replace permission. One trusted person making an exception had already shown how quickly confidence could become vulnerability. Charles later sat alone with the Balmoral access report and removed his glasses. For several seconds, He did not touch the pages. Anger had carried him through the confrontation, but disappointment now settled more heavily. These were not strangers testing the palace from outside. People already inside his circle had created the opening themselves. That distinction hurt, because authority depended on trust, and trust was exactly what the afternoon had damaged. William uncovered another detail before the review could slow down. Scheduling records showed that the unauthorized aide had asked questions about the timing of the Balmoral briefing before arriving in Scotland. The prince immediately understood the implication. The man's appearance had not been spontaneous. Catherine then learned something even more troubling, through a fictional documented staff account. Another employee had refused him access earlier that same day. Catherine told Charles immediately. Someone had therefore encountered a clear refusal, and later found a way around it. The king asked one question: who overruled the decision? William remained beside her as staff traced the authorization backward. Camilla waited for the answer too, knowing exactly which office was already under suspicion. Charles ordered the name identified before dinner. When it arrived, the trail led straight back to the household, already fighting to defend itself. By evening, the palace had moved beyond suspicion. Someone had actively reversed a refusal, and the consequences were about to reach the people who believed the crisis would disappear once the briefing ended. By the time the family prepared for dinner, Balmoral felt different. The briefing room had been cleared, staff movements had been restricted, and conversations that normally traveled easily between households now stopped at closed doors. Yet the sharpest consequence was not administrative. It was personal. Camilla discovered that one of her senior employees had been temporarily removed from sensitive duties, while Catherine learned that her decision to speak up had changed relationships inside the residence almost instantly. Charles signed off on the temporary removal before the evening meal. The senior staffer who had bypassed the earlier refusal would no longer take part in confidential briefings while the internal review continued. An internal review meant a private examination of decisions, access records, and staff conduct to establish exactly how a failure happened. The king also ordered that the uninvited aide receive no further entry to restricted royal meetings until every part of his account had been tested. Camilla received the decision in private and read it without speaking. She closed the note, placed it beside an untouched cup of tea, and told a trusted advisor that one person's mistake now seemed to have placed her entire household under suspicion. The queen consort was angry, but beneath the anger sat something more painful. She knew the breach had happened through an office linked to her authority, and she could not simply dismiss what that meant. Catherine felt no satisfaction either. She found William away from the larger group and admitted that she wished she had been wrong about the stranger from the beginning. The princess had spoken because the situation felt unsafe, not because she wanted anyone punished. William reminded her that silence would have been worse. If Charles had continued discussing sensitive responsibilities while an unauthorized person listened, the damage could have reached far beyond one uncomfortable afternoon. The aide's fictional recorded account then deepened the crisis. During questioning, he said he believed his presence had effectively been approved because someone had told him, "The Queen's office has handled it." Charles read the statement carefully. Camilla immediately denied ever giving such an instruction. The king accepted that there was no evidence she had personally ordered the man's entry, but he refused to ignore the way her office's authority had apparently been used. Camilla understood what came next. Someone had either spoken in her name without permission, or created an atmosphere where staff believed they could do so. Neither possibility was easy to accept. Before the night ended, she sent a private request to Catherine. No Charles, no William, no aides, just the two of them. For the first time since the briefing stopped, the women at the center of the fallout would face each other without staff, protocol, or family members standing between them. Write a detailed script, based on the outline provided for a royal monarchy documentary, using a bold, dramatic, and immersive storytelling approach. Tone and style: bold, cinematic, and suspenseful throughout. Narrative-driven: mystery, foreshadowing, emotional highs and lows. Never dry or biographical in style. No visual descriptions or scene directions. Mix short and long sentences to control pacing and enhance drama. Character rule: every major character introduced in a section must appear at least twice within that section. Never introduce a character and abandon them before the section ends. Name repetition rule: never use a character's full name or title more than once per paragraph. After the first mention, replace with pronouns or descriptive alternatives. For royal figures, use variations such as the Queen, she, her, the monarch, William, the prince, he, the future king, Sophie, she, the trusted confidant, Camilla, she, the queen consort, Charles, he, the king, the monarch. This rule applies to every character across every section, without exception. Sourcing rule: when a character reveals or breaks silence, always specify how: a private interview, a documented account, a recorded conversation, even if fictional. Never leave a revelation sourceless. Terminology rule: when any royal title, document, ceremony, or institutional term appears for the first time, include one plain language explanation before continuing. Never assume audience familiarity with royal terminology. Critical: terminology placement rule: never place a terminology explanation in the first 3 sentences of any section. The opening must establish emotion and momentum first. Terminology explanations belong inside paragraph 2 or later, embedded naturally within context, never as an interruption to the dramatic opening. Wrong approach: it was a declaration that shook the monarchy. The future royal order meant the planned structure of roles and titles. Nothing would ever be the same. Correct approach: it was a declaration that shook the monarchy. Nothing would ever be the same. Charles understood what the future royal order, the planned structure of roles and titles defining the monarchy's next chapter, truly meant for everyone in that room. Context rule: every section must contain at least 2 grounding details explaining why the moment matters, not just that it matters. Emotional stakes must be clear. Paragraph opening rule: no paragraph may open with a passive or explanatory construction. Every paragraph must begin with either a character in action or feeling something, a short, punchy statement of consequence, a sensory or atmospheric detail that creates immediate tension. Wrong openings: a private palace briefing was supposed to be controlled, and that mattered because briefings are where the situation had developed over time, and it was important to understand. Royal tradition dictated that. Correct openings: Charles knew every person in that room understood the weight of what was coming. The closed door changed everything. Camilla did not move. She did not speak. Engagement rules: use cliffhangers and foreshadowing to build suspense. No standalone endings. Every section must flow naturally into the next. Use bold, dramatic phrasing at key moments. Contrast success with suffering, where relevant to deepen emotional impact. Language: simple but powerful word choices. Conversational and immersive tone. Never formal, academic, or stiff. Vivid through word choice alone. Never through visual instructions. Format: paragraph format only. No bullet points, no headers, no numbered lists in output, no outline headings in the final script. Follow the exact word count specified in the outline for each section. Do not reset tone between sections. Carry narrative momentum forward. Each section must feel like a continuation, never a fresh start. Insert outline here. Please add this line at the end of this script. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. and we will see you in next one. Section 9. The door Charles would never leave unguarded again. Word count, 440 words. Tone and style. Reflective, decisive, emotional closure. Restrained triumph. Hook, 76 words. Charles did not finish the crisis with anger. He finished it with a rule. Gathering Catherine, William, and Camilla after the review was complete, the king made clear that Balmoral would not become a battlefield between households, and that no member of the family would be blamed for the unauthorized aide's actions. But he also refused to soften what had happened. Trust had been stretched until assumption replaced permission, and from that moment forward, the boundary would be unmistakable. Key points. Context. Charles delivers the final fictional decision. Restricted royal briefings will use individual authorization only, and no household may substitute its own approval for the king's confidential access procedures. Context. The senior employee who overrode the refusal is permanently removed from confidential briefing responsibilities, while the uninvited aide loses access to future restricted meetings. The review is formally closed. Emotional resolution. Charles tells Catherine that interrupting him was uncomfortable but correct. She feels relief rather than victory, because the intervention has finally been understood as protection of the meeting, not an attack on another royal. Emotional resolution. Camilla accepts responsibility for failures within her office, without accepting blame for an instruction she never gave. She and Catherine exchange a restrained acknowledgement, signaling that their private conversation has prevented the incident from becoming a lasting personal feud. Final revelation. William realizes the greatest consequence is not who lost access, but how Charles responded. The king chose transparent boundaries over protecting appearances, strengthening the structure William will one day inherit. Concrete closing moment. Charles returns to the same Balmoral briefing room. This time, every authorized name has been checked personally. He looks around the table, waits until the door closes, then calmly says, "Now we begin." Definitive emotional verdict. The Balmoral interruption ultimately becomes a test of trust rather than a story of betrayal. Catherine's vigilance forces a weakness into the open. Camilla confronts the consequences inside her own household. William learns the cost of overlooking an early warning, and Charles proves that preserving unity sometimes requires stopping everything before moving forward. The monarchy survives the moment, not because the breach is hidden, but because the boundary it violated is finally made stronger. Transition line/final closure. The first briefing ended because one person did not belong in the room. The next began because everyone who remained finally understood exactly why they did. What had begun behind a closed Balmoral door did not remain there. By the following morning in this dramatized storyline, the interruption had become the dominant royal conversation, stripped of its private nuance and reduced to one extraordinary image: a king stopping his own briefing because the Princess of Wales had spotted someone who should not have been inside. For the family, the danger now changed. They were no longer managing only a security failure. They were managing what that failure appeared to say about them. Charles approved a tightly controlled fictional statement before breakfast. Palace communications confirmed that a scheduled Balmoral discussion had been paused after an access irregularity, and that procedures were reviewed immediately. Palace communications meant the official team responsible for explaining royal matters to the public and press. The statement avoided naming the staff members involved, but it made one decision clear: authorization for confidential meetings would now be tightened under the king's direct authority. William read the first wave of coverage with growing concern. He worried Catherine would be turned into either a heroic protector or a woman policing Camilla's household, and both versions felt dangerously simple. The prince knew she had spoken because something felt wrong, not because she wanted a public victory. Catherine disliked the attention for the same reason. She had challenged one breach. She had never asked to become the symbol of a family conflict. Charles reacted with frustration as the story widened. The monarch believed a human failure inside one briefing was being transformed into a battle over loyalty, influence, and competing royal camps. Camilla understood the danger too. The queen consort had already accepted privately that her household had made a serious mistake, and she knew denying that reality now would only deepen suspicion around her. The public moment came quickly. A fictional London morning newspaper appeared with the stark headline, "The meeting the king stopped," beside an image of Balmoral's gates. By midday, visitors outside Buckingham Palace were discussing Catherine's intervention, while broadcasters repeated the same dramatic framing. One decision made inside Scotland had suddenly become a national argument about who was protecting the monarchy from its own weaknesses. The palace moved to close the personnel question before speculation grew further. Through an internal documented decision, the senior staffer who had overridden the access refusal was permanently removed from confidential briefing duties. The unauthorized aide would receive no future restricted clearance. Charles wanted no ambiguity left behind. Then the king called Catherine, William, and Camilla together one final time. The stranger was gone, the staff decision was made, and public judgment had arrived. Only one thing remained: the monarch's verdict on what Balmoral had exposed about trust inside his family. Charles did not finish the crisis with anger. He finished it with a rule. Gathering Catherine, William, and Camilla after the review was complete, the king made clear that Balmoral would not become a battlefield between households, and that no member of the family would be blamed for the unauthorized aide's actions. But he also refused to soften what had happened. Trust had been stretched until assumption replaced permission, and from that moment forward, the boundary would be unmistakable. Charles delivered the final decision without hesitation. Every restricted royal briefing would now use individual authorization only, meaning each person entering a confidential meeting had to be approved by name rather than entering under another household's general permission. The rule mattered because sensitive discussions could no longer depend on assumptions. No office, however senior, could replace the king's own access procedures with its own judgment. The monarch then closed the personnel question. The senior employee who had overridden the original refusal was permanently removed from confidential briefing responsibilities, while the uninvited aide lost access to future restricted meetings. The internal review was formally ended. Charles had found no evidence that Camilla personally ordered the intrusion, but he made clear that the failure inside her office had consequences that could not simply be erased. Charles turned to Catherine next. He admitted that being interrupted in front of the room had been uncomfortable, but he told her she had been right to speak. The princess felt relief rather than triumph. She had never wanted to embarrass anyone. She had wanted the meeting protected. Camilla understood that now. The queen consort accepted responsibility for the weakness inside her household, without accepting blame for an order she had never given, and the restrained acknowledgement between the two women closed the personal wound before it became something deeper. William listened carefully as the final decision settled over the room. The prince realized the greatest lesson was not about who had lost access. It was about how Charles had responded. The king had chosen clear boundaries over protecting appearances, and that mattered to the future king, because one day the same responsibility would belong to him. Charles eventually returned to the same Balmoral briefing room. Every authorized name had been checked personally. Catherine was there, William was there, Camilla was there. The monarch waited until the door closed, looked around the table, and calmly said, "Now we begin." The first briefing ended because one person did not belong in the room. The next began because everyone who remained finally understood exactly why they did. Balmoral had tested trust, exposed weakness, and forced the family to confront what silence could cost. Catherine had spoken. Camilla had accepted the consequences. William had learned from hesitation, and Charles had drawn the line. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.